celebrates Kerouac. I want to thank you guys all for coming out this morning. We've been having events. They kicked off really on Wednesday evening, but the festival proper kicked off on Thursday, and great day yesterday, and we're starting off with a beautiful day today. We had a commemorative event, and there are a couple tours, walking and bus tour that are going on, so some more people will probably trickle in as those tours conclude. But this is a beautiful program that we have to present today. It's part of a series of events that we do at our festivals every year called Talking Jack, which is kind of an open conversation about different aspects of Jack Kerouac, the man, the writer, and we usually bring in somebody to facilitate that discussion and sort of lead it in a certain direction, have it jump off, but it really is a participatory event. That's why we're set up in a circle here. We get two of them this year. We had a great one yesterday with a number of scholars, including Brett Sigurdsson, who's over here, in town from Minnesota right now. You know, a lot of people coming in. With Charles Shuttlesworth here in town from the West Coast. You know, a lot of great scholarship, and that was what we focused on yesterday with the launch of a volume of scholarly essays called Rethinking Kerouac, Reappraisals, after the continuities and afterlives. Did I actually get the subtitle correct on that one? Available on Bloomsbury for the mere price of $30 now if people want to get it. So great book if people want to check that out. But today it's Talking Jack Poetics, and I'm very excited to say that this is the first piece of programming, not that he's participated in, but that he has brought forth. And this is a man, Logan Hill, who has been a participant in Lowell Celebrates Kerouac going all the way back to 2012.
That was my first year, yeah. I've got a slide about my history with it too. So
he'll get into it, but this is a guy I've known for quite some time. He's a fabulous poet. He's an educator, lives in Virginia. Richmond, Virginia. Is a passionate man about Kerouac and Lowell, but he has been doing a lot of research. He's going to get into it, and without any further ado, I'm very happy to hand it over to our facilitator for this session, Mr. A. Logan Hill, ladies and gentlemen.
Awesome. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good? I'll try to project. Well, thank you all so much for being here and for that lovely introduction, Mike. I'm really, really grateful for the board and for all of you, and I guess most importantly, Jack, because we wouldn't be here, right, without Jack. I wanted to start just to kind of like contextualize a little bit of like how I got here, and then I'll get a little bit into why I like Jack's poetry so much and how I look at it as a poet myself. So I would consider myself, I guess, a poet scholar. I don't know if in that order, I guess, and a teaching artist as well. In 2020, COVID happened, and my grandmother just passed away, and I got her car. It had 15,000 miles on it, and I put about 20,000 more miles on it, driving across the country, and I ended up in Denver one day. I remember like finding a Days Inn off of Colfax in Denver, and I got a room, and I decided to walk down Colfax to the Capitol to see kind of, you know, catch the energy of Denver, and I'm walking along. And there's this intersection on Colfax, and the cross street is Logan, and I said, wow, like, that's my name. I must go down the street. And I walked down the street a little bit, and lo and behold, on the side of this building is this mural. And this mural, and thinking kind of about like the divine spirit coming to you, and as a poet, conduit person, kind of preparing yourself to be ready for what is given. From the Spirit, the great divine Spirit. You know, I love that. I love this quote so much. I use it with all my students, kind of at the beginning of the school year to kind of set the tone. Practice kindness all day to everybody, and you will realize you're already in heaven now. And I feel like in many ways, all of Jack's writing is an attempt to do that, like bring heaven to earth through his, sonoric poetry, and then. You'll see that I kind of make this connection between the ancient epics of in the Homeric tradition and the Iliad and the Odyssey. So yes, I'm calling this. I came up with this title the other day. I'm really fascinated with the archive as well, and Brett and I have talked many hours at the Worthen about archivization, and well, I guess I'll get to that next slide a little later, but an archivization of reality through living experience, memory, imagination, ethereal song, and the lyric, the Homeric, ekphrastic, somatic, alchemical magic of Jack's poetry. And that's really kind of how I view him as a writer and his work. The talk that kind of kicked it off a couple days ago, it was a talk about pick, and I really enjoyed, I think Keith Mitchell mentioned this quote, "Take away the sentimentality, jazz solo, and a mention of the road, and what do you have?" If you take that out of Jack's writing, what is it? What do you really have? And I find that those are the things that I love the most. Some of the things that I love the most about Jack's poetry. So I kind of wanted to start with kind of a framing of how I came to Jack and the beats through this documentary. So praise Mr. David Scott, who was my 11th grade English teacher, who showed us most of this documentary in its entirety. He was kind of pushing the limits a little bit with the Bukowski sections, in that time. But I came across another one of my favorite poets, talking kind of about the ancient tradition of poetry, in this like Homeric tradition, and what a poet does or did in that time. So I want to kind of start with that, and he talks a little bit about, that's him, Ed Sanders, with his talking tie. I want to also kind of consider like the saxophone or like the jazz band as the like modern lyre in some ways, the instrument. So I want to start by just playing this for you all. I won't play all of it, but there's like a little bit at the beginning where he talks about like the ancient traditions of poetry, and then he goes into this poem that he wrote about Henri Matisse. And the first couple lines, this will all kind of circle back to, the genius was 81. And so we'll kind of also talk about genius, genies, daemons, divine creative spirit, and how that also plays into this Homeric ancient tradition of poetry, which I think Jack was totally in tune with. So we'll start with this. Turn that up a bit.
Logopia. Phanopia is the way it looks on a page. And
you also hear him mention Ezra Pound, and I'll talk a little later about Ezra, in some of his letters. Kerouac talks about like, oh, I never realized like the freedom that Ezra Pound gave, and then like letters maybe a few months later, like excrement, Ezra Pound. What are we doing? And he's talking to Corsa about like get away from Pound. So I'll read some of those quotes, but this is Ed Sanders.
Ezra Pound triad, there's phanopia, melopia, and logopia. And phanopia is the way it looks on a page. And I bring hieroglyphs to that and drawings and stuff. And melopia is how it sounds. And melopia is where the muse comes in. I think there has to be another muse invented for the electromagnetic era, which I call retentia, for the retained image on tape or on film or on micro disc or whatever. And I just think it's important to be able to perform your poetry well as for it to look good on the page, which is phanopia, and for it to appear well in the mind, which is logopia. That's called the talking tie. And it just goes back to performing. In ancient times, they had a little 4-string tortoiseshell lyre with the tortoiseshell as the sounding board and a little cow horn or wooden arms, and then a crossbar for the strings. And the poet would sit there with a plectrum or something to strum his keys, the strings, and would perform his poetry. And it was this hypnotic, riverine type of verse that people would listen to for hours and hours. These dactyls, da 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 da, and they would listen to it over and over. And I was interested in kind of building a modern instrument, electronic instrument that was small and wouldn't overwhelm the poetry. So I got these little tuned synthesizers, 2 of them, one for each hand, with the keyboards on the fingers. The genius was 81.
So I wanted to start with that because I love kind of the history that Ed Sanders kind of brings in about the poet sitting there playing the lyre, for hours on end, and often in this poetic tradition, the oral tradition of poetry, these myths and stories will be passed down orally, and so you can imagine sometimes things got changed, or hyperbolic is a word that George and I have been talking a lot about this week. So I want to go to the next thing. So by way of getting here, I must express my gratitude to Professor Hillary Holliday. So I met Hillary Holliday in 2011 at James Madison University. She was teaching a beat literature survey course, and she brought in Gordon Ball, who taught at VMI for a while, and brought Allen Ginsberg, the poet, to VMI, and then Matt Theato, who taught here for a while as well. Is he in Japan now?
Yeah.
He's in Japan. And so I met her, loved the class, and then I graduated from JMU in 2012. And in the summer of 2012, I had saved all this money, and my girlfriend dumped me like the day before we were going to go out west on this road trip. So instead, I decided, well, maybe I'll just do a New England trip, like up the East Coast. And so, of course, Hillary was like, well, you have to go to Lowell, and you have to go find the Wrinkly Tar Corner in Pawtucketville, and go to Walden. And one of her friends from graduate school, Richard Pickering, was also he's the deputy director at the Plymouth Museum, formerly known as the Plymouth Plantation, where they have colonial interpreters. And so I was up there on my birthday. This picture was a couple days after my birthday, June 28th, where I actually interviewed to work at the Plymouth Plantation. And eventually I got the job. But a couple days later, Hillary was like, well, you got to go talk to Keith Mitchell. So I'm like in the English department, and I'm talking with Keith Mitchell, and then I meet Todd Teachin. She introduced me to all these people. And then kind of in between that meeting, Matt Theato at the time was finishing up a lecture in a building on South Campus. And so in between that, I was really blessed to meet John Sampis and got to go into his house. And I forget, it's many years ago, I forget which book they had just come out with, but he was just the nicest man, and showed me kind of all of the things that he had in his archive. So really blessed for those people in my life. And then Matt gets out. I meet Matt in his lecture hall, and we drive out to Walden. And so he took this picture. This is me a long time ago. So this is kind of like how I got here. And then in graduate school, so I did my MFA in poetry at UMass Amherst. I was in James Tate's final workshop, and there's an interesting quote, letter, where Kerouac is like, I have it here. James Tate came out with a book posthumously called Hell, I Love Everybody. And I found in a letter, oh yeah, here it is. I found in a letter Jack kind of saying the same thing. This is March 4th, 1955. I've realized something utterly strange and yet common. I think I've experienced the deep turning about. At present, I'm completely happy and feel completely free. I love everybody and intend to go on doing so. And that's kind of where that practice kindness all day to everyone, and you realize you're already in heaven now, kind of comes into play in how I think about this. So in graduate school, I'm studying with James Tate, and Hillary emails me one day and says, would you like to come and present as a young scholar at the Beatnik Shindig? And I said, yes, of course. And this is where I first met Brian Hassett. If you know, I want a big shout out for Brian Hassett, because he was really influential in kind of helping line this up. And in this presentation, I talked a little bit about kind of the curatorial nature, the archive, the curatorial nature of Jack, and how he's constantly writing in notebooks. He's wandering, hitchhiking across America, and just constantly kind of writing everything that he believes is beautiful down in these notebooks. And so in a way, I see him as like an archivist or curator of his own mind. So I give a spirited talk on that at the Beatnik Shindig. This was me at the Plymouth Plantation, but this is kind of my history. Day at the Berg, and kind of thinking about the unbearable reality, you know, and writing true stories. And I'll zoom in on this. This is from an early notebook. And this is where we kind of get some of Jack's philosophy about how he sees poetry. The doctrine of supreme reality in free verse form. This is the philosophical foundation of the poem. Reality reigns supreme. Thus, ideality, a compound of the imagination and the memory, longing, does not reign supreme. It is forever doomed to unfulfillment. I love this, this is the philosophical foundation of the poem. Reality reigns supreme. I wrote the stories because they were true. Poets are often seen as truth tellers, right? They are the conduits. Yes, and this is the other thing. In the ancient tradition, right, in the Homeric tradition, I kind of liken poets to combat journalists, right? You're out on the field, and the Iliad, at least, is mostly a list of names of the dead soldiers, and the poet was a part of the king's court, and lauded for doing that work. I make this connection too with in being at the Berg. I was really intentional about wanting to find some of his earliest poems that he wrote, and I first think about the sections in Dr. Sachs where he's writing these like these newspaper articles and like fake baseball games and stuff that kind of suggest too that Jack is like this poet journalist going out and seeing the world and reporting back on what he saw. And for me as a poet, that's one of the things that I really love about writing poetry is truth telling. So I guess the earliest poem that I could find in the Berg was from 1943, and it's a sonnet. And so I have a picture of Shakespeare here next to it because Burroughs says like Shakespeare is the end, and I believe Jack Kerouac loved Shakespeare. Maybe we can read some of this. It's called "The More of Myself," a sonnet by John Kerouac, December 1943. And I don't know, I find it, the other thing that I was really interested in, and I think this came up in the conversation yesterday, was what did Jack read? And certainly we could say, yeah, well, he read everything, right? But he loved Shakespeare, he loved French poets, and in his letters to Alan, he also writes a little bit about some of the poets that he loves. This is June 10th, 1949. Jack is in Denver and he's writing to Alan. He says, for instance, let's start with my recent crazy poem, then yours. And he includes this crazy poem of his in this letter. And further down, he's like, when I can, I now read French poetry. De Malherbe and Racine, the French Shakespeare. So he loves Shakespeare. Shakespeare is known for making up words, and I think you can find a beautiful correlation between a lot of the words and word sounds that Jack Kerouac uses in his writings. This is something else that I found. It's a tone poem, and I have a picture of Walt Whitman here because Whitman is also a poet that Jack really loved. And we'll, if you haven't seen the Steve Allen interview, we're gonna watch that because when I watched it initially, I missed this moment. He's talking to Steve Allen about Specimen Days, right? And Steve Allen thinks that he's like putting him on, trying to josh him or something, or get him to laugh or whatever. But he's like, no, true, yes. But what I love about this section, a tone poem, when you think about tone and music, you have this kind of Whitman-esque line where the line is too long for the page, so it's like indented in the second line, and it continues on these like really long Whitmanic lines. And you have the poem up here. I remember longing, and that's kind of where that in this image, the supreme reality in free verse form, which Whitman also did. I remember longing as the seasons welled it high within me. Remembering this is sweeter still than the longing was itself. a sharper, more real, oh, imminent response, then trembled on the new yet everlasting air above the longing moment. And then you'll see just below it, prose, and then it basically takes like the same lines from this Whitmanic style line poem, and he just puts it in prose. And this is, I think, maybe 8 or 10 pages in a notebook. I remember longing as the seasons welded high within me, and remembering it so much dearer than the longing was itself. A sharper, more real, so imminent response trembled in the air, that now yet everlasting air, seasonal while never familiar. And these 3 or 4 lines at this top part kind of come in and start new paragraphs later on. And that was kind of a beautiful connection that I enjoyed making between him and Whitman. And we also have this. So I think what's so lovely is that we are in the library where Jack Kerouac would skip class and come read books of his own that he wanted to read. And we had the young Prometheans, right? And the Promethean poetry collection, which I was able to look through a little bit yesterday. And there's some really cool books that kind of connect Jack's ideas, I think, to the modern contemporary poetry. But there's another poem that I found that's kind of referencing the Prometheans, on hearing Beethoven's Prometheus Overture. So that was another really lovely thing to have found in the bird. And here again, he's referencing these ancient Greek mythological creatures. Kind of an aside, I might argue that one of his favorite Greek gods was Dionysus, the god of food and drink. And George and I were driving down the street into town a couple days ago, and we saw this cat, and it was a big cat, and we realized, I was like, turn around, George. And there was it was like a bobcat in the middle of the street. And so I was doing a little bit more research on the spirit of a bobcat and what it, how it kind of is related to ancient mythology. And it, in fact, was like directly linked to Dionysus. And so I'm in some ways, Jack loved cats too. In some ways, I think like, well, there he was, kind of just in his spirit, visiting us on our way to town. So just kind of all.
The Young Prometheus collection, is that here?
It is, yeah. So
is it Sammy Sampas's poetry and that kind of thing?
It's like it's maybe like a shelf. It's maybe like 5 or 6 shelves, and it's, I think, upstairs.
Directly above us.
Yeah, directly above us. There's like a chair where Kerouac would sit, and then there's like books just kind of.
So it's what they read?
It's not. It's some of what they read. Like there's a lot of books of Whitman. There's some Basho there. Emily Dickinson, obviously. But then there are also contemporary books that kind of fit within that same realm of, I guess, what Jack would like. But it's cool. You can go out there and check it out later.
I wasn't really able to ascertain what the connection was between. I mean, there's a Pollard next to like a contemporary writer in that, right?
Oh, do you in the collection up there?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. What is the connection? It's this Promethean idea.
I think it's yeah. So I'll try to read this. It's we hope by naming this substantial poetry collection in their honor, and their honor being Sebastian and Jack, we will continually inspire future generations of young thinkers, singers, and poets to keep their creative fires lit, no matter the cost. And Prometheus was the god that gave the world fire and got in trouble by Zeus, and and they both Sebastian and Jack kind of liked that story of that idea of being a young Promethean. I kind of see that as maybe being a little like counterculture, like doing the other things that maybe breaking the rules a little bit, but then you also have kind of like the keeper of the fire, of the flame, which Jack did as well.
Right.
On the mountain.
What happened to Prometheus? I mean, actually, I just made the association of what would happen to Jack. I mean, talk about livers.
Right. Well, yeah. Yeah, that too. Okay, I think. So again, yeah, this was another really early poem that I found. This was 1944. Oh no. Yes. Okay. Technology. You got all that. This one I believe he wrote when he was in Bronx jail. This was after he was like labeled. Lucian Carr turned himself in. Was labeled as an accessory in the murder because he helped hide the murder weapon. And I don't know. I just thought that this was really cool too because it's again one of the earliest poems in the Berg, in at least the poetry section of those archives. So again, you kind of have this other example of him just writing about all of his true experience, everything that he's experienced.
Logan, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What's your sense of this early poetry and his development as a writer? Like, is he working with forms like the sonnet to try to learn those? Is he like writing in those forms to like push their boundaries, break them? Or is he just experimenting because he wants to be he just wants to be a writer in all his forms? Like, after looking at those archival poems, what do they add up to you in terms of his development so far in this story?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I have a section on hybridity in here and how he kind of views like hybrid forms, and I want to talk about like the haibun, right? And you've got like Scripture of the Golden Eternity, with the prose poems that are these koans, right? These like forms of trying to experience enlightenment, right? So yeah, I will talk about that. It makes me think of, I think he uses poetry a lot to kind of get away from writing fiction. And there's a couple quotes in here that I want to talk about. So he's talking about working on Dr. Sachs. This is a letter from Jack to Alan. Alan is in New York and Jack is in Denver, July 5th, 1949. Well, I began writing The Rose of the Rainy Night this week to amuse myself while doing On the Road and to prepare for the myth of Dr. Sachs. The Rose is a big Spencerian work of many cantos. So here I guess Jack says to amuse himself while he's writing his other longer, arguably epic poems, or works of fiction as they're published. So then he includes, so doth the rain blow down like melted lutes, their airs condensed, and water harps and waterfalls and all manner of concertinia, Tharcanimus of the night alluring. And then there's a little line, as you see, it isn't so good, but I'll fix it. I merely put down what comes into my head, though not recklessly. This way, I'll pile up a big rose and have something to pluck out, petals. And then there's another little quatrain. Unfolding petal, a me pluria, the rose of the rain falls open, and drooping lights the sky with firkins of softest dew. So you do get kind of that more traditional Spencerian, like Shakespearean language, And then he goes on. So I guess to also answer your question, right, to amuse himself, but I merely put down what comes into my head, and he does that in multiple forms, which we'll look at in the hybridity section. We'll figure it out. So after this, he says, however, now I understand poetry and I'm just going along. My prose has improved because of these studies. I'll just copy one sentence. It would be too much. You'll read it all later. And so then he quotes, I believe, a section from On the Road. This demonstrates the utter gravity and importance of our poetic experimentations, for they reach the rational atmospheres of the prose sentence, as in Melville's prose, make it more than that, much, much more. So the poetic experimentations for him, I think, often allow him to write these really beautiful, long, kind of like jazz solo sentences in his prose. And there's another, I'll skip to that because it's a good quote. Honestly, reading the letters was absolutely, between him and Alan, are gold in my opinion. for some of this stuff. And you think about like all of his friends who he hung out with, they're mostly poets, right? Like Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Gregory Corso, Allen Ginsberg, Peter Orlovsky, right? All of these, you know, and the list goes on, right? They're all talking about it all the time, and you'll see later in his life, he kind of becomes like this critic in this friend group. Like, well, that poet is bad, or like, you're the greatest poet, and he's often honored in you know, being the forefront, I guess. So here's another thing about lines, and another the other thing that I think about too is the haiku. There's this the book of haikus. In the introduction, it kind of likens this idea of writing each sentence as its own haiku. So if you're thinking of the image better, kind of like funneling everything into its like most succinct image. You can think about all of his sentences as haiku, or of the haiku mind at least. So he talks a little bit about lines here. I told Ferlinghetti off about this. Ferling thinks like Gregory that I wrote prose, as I state myself. Lines don't make a poet. Poetry is poetry. The longer the line, the better when it comes finally to 2-page Cassidy sentences. Hooray. Big attack against me in The Nation saying I was a fool boy poet and Richard Wilbur a heroic man poet. Again, I think back to Whitman. Poetry is poetry. The longer the line, the better when it comes finally to 2 American page Cassidy sentences. Hooray. That also kind of reminds me of the Joan Anderson letter, which I believe it to be influential on his more spontaneous, poetic nature in his writing. And
Logan,
yeah.
You know, you were showing that Whitman where he was writing a poem, the long line,
yeah,
and then the prose underneath. I mean, it just occurs to me that that's the way you prep the prose, by getting concise images, like the haiku idea,
yeah,
so that you can just take the kernel words and cut the prepositions, you know what I mean, or the conjunctions, because when you read his stuff, and I've tried to emulate this, you can actually be more concise by not stopping. So you don't have to put a period and then say the, or start with a conjunction. You just like keep it flowing. It's actually more concise than that labored, like.
Well, and that's, I think that's why he loved writing on scrolls and these little pocket notebooks that, I have a slightly different suggestion about how to use these spiral notebooks. But what he would do typically, and this kind of reminds me also of this like journalistic, like combat journalist, poet, Homeric tradition. So he would write like on the front of each page. And we'll see this in Mexico City Blues. And then he'll go and he'll write on the bottom of the next page. And once he got to the very end, he would flip it over and then write on the back. All right? And it's kind of this like, you guys know what a Mobius strip is?
Yeah.
Yeah, this way of construction reminds me of somewhat of like a Mobius strip, this like continual American lyric just going on and on and on. You could relate that perhaps to like the Legend of Dulois, where he's everything kind of fits into this larger picture of how he's curating his life as an archivist of his own mind. So I think personally, and if there are any poets in the house or writers and you want to write in a notebook like this, I suggest you write on this page, the first page, and then you just have like a scroll basically, and you go from the top here, and then you just keep going like that. Jack did it a little differently, and we're grateful for that too. I think, so we're at kind of the genius stage, and I was talking to Mike at the Worthen the other day, and he was like, Jack, he was such a genius, right? I don't know if you've all seen this, but it's a really beautiful TED Talk by Elizabeth Gilbert called Your Elusive Creative Genius. And she's talking about kind of how all the artists in modern time, often a lot of the artists we lose from their own hand because they believe that they are the genius, that all of the divine creative energy is in them, and it doesn't come from anywhere else. But in the ancient, the Greek times, it was believed that you weren't a genius, but that you had one. And so she likens this to like Dobby the house elf in Harry Potter, right? Or like you could think of like Tinkerbell and Peter Pan, where instead of being a genius, that you would have these divine creative spirits come visiting you. And I kind of want to posit that I think Jack had some really great daemons or genies helping him out. And you could maybe even consider this like, there's that line in Song of Myself, and God drops poems on the street, and I leave them there and continue on. You can imagine maybe Whitman as one of his genies or daemons or spirits from the past kind of showing up for him. What I love about this, and we know that Jack put in the work. What she states is, it kind of takes away some of the ego from a writer. As a poet, this has been really helpful for me as a poet to like not stress so much about, having everything in me and getting it all down and it's all from me. There's as long as I show up for my part of the job, she says, like let the record state that I showed up for my part of the job, and if my genius didn't come for me, come help me that day, then that's not totally my fault, right? And if the work is bad, the genie didn't show up today. If the work's really good, you can't take all the credit. And I love thinking about Jack in this way, and I think he even states this in the. So it's interesting because he kind of contradicts himself. You are a genius all the time. So he's kind of saying that, oh no, the genius comes, is from you. But then the next line, these are the last two from the list of essentials. Writer, director of earthly movies, sponsored and angeled in heaven. So if you're thinking about like the poet as a conduit of this like ethereal energy, the role of ekphrasis as well, which in Greek means to tell out, to describe, right? You have like Ode on the Grecian Urn by Keats, that is this ekphrastic bit of writing where you tell it out, describe exactly what you see. But I find that with Jack's spirituality, a lot of the work that comes to him, does come from this like divine creative spirit through poetry and poetry as prayer in a lot of ways too. So that's another thing I kind of want to introduce. And if you haven't seen that, just as a creative being, if you're a creative being, it's a really beautiful thing to check out. And yeah, Elizabeth Gilbert talks a lot about. She mentions this poet Ruth Stone. She also talks about Tom Waits and how Tom Waits is driving down the interstate, and the genie visits him, and Tom Waits just looks up at the sky and it's like, "Can't you see that I'm driving, right? Like I can't receive you right now. I'm driving on the highway. There's no way for me to stop, and take down what you're giving me." Like she said, and then he says, "Go visit Leonard Cohen or something. I can't be that conduit today. I can't be that receptor of that spiritual, heavenly, sponsored, angel in heaven energy that's being channeled through." So I like to think of Jack as a conduit as well. And then okay, I just want to read the back of this real quick. So we're kind of moving into travel writing and some of the other forms that he wrote, and he loved haiku, and this kind of relates to my conversation about the hybridity of the text, because in the books of haiku, these are American haiku, so these aren't traditional haiku, or haikus or haiku, so he adds the S to it. These are American haikus or haiku, and are not intended to emulate the syllable counting of the original Japanese versions. American haikus should simply tell a whole lot in 3 short lines, as above example. Chief Crazy Horse looks north with tearful eyes. The first snow flurries. And there you kind of see this distillation of language and imagery, which, don't stop but to think of the image better, he says in one of the lists. The Narrow Road to the Deep North by Basho is actually haibun, which is this hybrid form where you have like a prose poem, and then it ends with like this distillation of basically your travel log into a haiku. And I'm reading the back of this and I'm like, well, this sounds exactly like Jack. In his perfectly crafted haiku poems, Basho describes the natural world with great simplicity and delicacy of feeling. When he composed The Narrow Road to the Deep North, he was an ardent student of Zen Buddhism, setting off on a series of travels designed to strip away the trappings of the material world and bring spiritual enlightenment. He wrote of the seasons changing, of the smell of the rain, the brightness of the moon, and the beauty of the waterfall through which he sensed the mysteries of the universe. These 17th century travel writings not only chronicle Basho's perilous journeys through Japan, but they also capture his vision of eternity in the transient world around him. I mean, doesn't that kind of sound like exactly what Jack did, like on the road and hitchhiking across America and, kind of wanting to remove himself from the trappings of the modern world and kind of go deeper within. So this is kind of where I would kind of liken the transition from Pound to, a more Buddhist philosophy. There's a letter here I want to share with you. How we doing?
Doing great.
Okay, so June 27th, 28th, 1955, bottom of the letter. I just discovered Pound's cantos. Never realized poetry was free till now. So that's June 27th, 28th, 1955. Let's see, a couple. Let's see. A couple weeks later, July 14th, 1955. Get away from Pound. I dug him, and he is deliberately Greek and fancy with his onothos Greek expression balls. He and Hopkins suffer both from trying to show how fancy they are, and Yeats too. For poets, I like this too because he mentions some of the poets that he loves. For poets, I like Dickinson and Blake, William Blake, Emily Dickinson. But even they are ignorant because they simply don't know that everything is empty in and out in 10,000 infinite directions of the undisturbed light. Please, Alan, wake up. If for one moment you doubt Buddhism because you're attached to, I don't know how to say it, I just don't understand. I really thought you were intelligent, and Bill too. Like Neil is much more on the ball now with his Casey, who is, after all, close. Casey is a Purusha believer, but outside of that, he is almost pure Buddhist. I'll explain Casey to you. It's not that I'm so smart. It's only that the light has been vouchsafed to me when I stopped thinking. I love that. The light has been vouchsafed to me when I stopped thinking. I confess to a great deal of impatience seeing people receive the teaching and not absorbing it. So there's that conduit nature again. The energy, the receiving of the teaching, the divine creative spirit, but then not being able to synthesize it or absorb it and put it on the page. This too, turns out that all my final favorite writers, Dickinson, Blake, and Thoreau, ended up their lives in little hermitages. And then he says, I guess I'll go. He considers wanting to find his own little hermitage. He says, I guess in Mexico. Also, I went to visit the Buddhist monastery at 60th Las Enciana Lane, Santa Barbara. I love that he kind of shifts his love for Pound in a couple weeks. Sorry about that. So you also have, and kind of thinking of this the somatic adventures, right? This kind of bodily feeling experience of the world through as the conduit, poet, combat journalist, however you want to see it. Trip Trap is this collection of haiku that were written along the road with Albert Sajo and Lou Welch. So you find I find this beautiful direct correlation between The Narrow Road to the Deep North, Jack's Koans, right, and Scripture of the Golden Eternity, and then this Haibun hybrid form. Have y'all seen this picture?
Oh yeah.
To me, it just gives this subtle vibe, energy of, being in tune with that divine spirit, right? Submissive to everything, open and listening. And before we get to talk about more of the hybrid forms, I also want to consider how music plays a part in this ancient tradition of the poet with the lyre, these long riverine verses that Ed Sanders talks about. but also like the art of listening, being meditation, silent, and preparing your body as the vessel to receive that. But so you'll see in this, if you haven't, what Nino was saying, that he mentions. Turn that down a little bit, but he mentions Whitman. One of his favorite poetic prose writers is Walt Whitman in Specimen Days. Would you get the lights from?
The light?
Would you get the lights from me if you don't mind?
Yeah, it's the flat one.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
So I just want to put this in the room a little bit.
In the early 1950s, the nation recognized in its midst a social movement called Beat Generation. A novel titled On the Road became a bestseller, and its author, Jack Kerouac, became a celebrity, partly because he'd written a powerful and successful book, partly because he seemed to be the embodiment of this new generation. Jack and I made an album together a few months back in which I played background piano for his poetry reading. And at that time, I made a note to book him on the show because I thought you would enjoy meeting him. So here he is, Jack Kerouac. Jack told me a little earlier he was nervous. Are you nervous now? No? Good. Jack, got a couple of square questions, but I think the answer would be interesting. How long did it take you to write On the Road?
3 weeks.
How many?
3 weeks.
3 weeks. It's amazing. How long were you on the road itself?
7 years.
7 years. And I was on the road once for 3 weeks, and it took me 7 years to write about it. Or the other way around. I've heard that you write so fast that you don't like to use regular typing paper, but instead you prefer to use one big long roll of paper. Is that true?
Yeah. When I write narrative novels, and I want to change my narrative thought, I keep going.
You don't want to change the pages at the end, you mean?
A foot-long teletype paper.
Oh, teletype rolls. Where do you get it?
Huh?
Where do you get the paper?
Yeah, teletype paper.
And where do you get it?
In a very good stationery store.
I see.
When I write my symbolistic, serious, impressionistic novels, I write them in pencil.
Oh, yeah? I've seen a lot of your poetry written in pencil, but I didn't realize that's how you worked on the prose stuff.
For narrative, it's good.
Yeah, I got the most hard question of all, but everybody always puts to you, I'm sure. Or because everybody always puts to you. How would you define the word beat? I don't mean why not time. I mean, is there...
Sympathetic.
Sympathetic? All right, I ask. Well, about this point, actually, we plan to have Jack read some poetry. And while looking again through his book the other day, it struck me, it occurred to me all over again, that his prose is extremely poetic. I think it's probably more poetic than that. And who else writes poetic type poems? Thomas Wolfe, I guess.
Walt Whitman. In Specimen Days. Walt Whitman's Specimen Days.
I thought you were putting me on there. All right, we'll look into that. And right now we'll look into Jack Kerouac's On the Road, and he'll mail it on you. We have to buy these papers. Okay?
So I love that Steve Allen is like, and we're gonna have Jack Kerouac read a little bit of his poetry, but then he hands him the novel, and if you all have seen this before, he doesn't even read from the book. He reads from like the front cover, and he doesn't just read from On the Road. He reads from Visions of Cody, and then like the ending of On the Road. And I just love that Steve Allen's like, yeah, and Jack's gonna read his poetry, even though this is one of my favorite poems, right? Epic poems is what I'm saying, On the Road. But it's still published as a novel, really, and so I kind of love the conversation, and like, well, I'll end with a Whitman quote.
You know what? Like I've seen this a million times.
Yeah.
Steve will not shut up. I go, well, really tough. And also, there's an ironic twist on the. He says you won't even have to buy these pages.
Mm-hmm.
Like, what does that mean? If you're going to steal a book, what are you going to rip out the page? You know what I mean? It's like. And then, I don't know if Steve saw that there was a page inserted there from Visions of Cody that wasn't the printed book.
It's
right?
my understanding it's just like taped on the front cover, like the inside of the front of the book. Yeah.
Well, I know,
It's right
but
in
like
front.
there's a little irony I just picked up on that. Maybe Steve saw that and said you wouldn't even have to buy these pages.
Sure. So there again, we have like Jack kind of like his ear, with, kind of eyes up, being attentive to the creative divine spirit. And you will experience some of this kind of magic that I am positing at the David Amram jam this, I guess, Sunday. And Amram was, a musician that Jack read his poetry with constantly. And it's my understanding that they would just get together and they would just listen to one another and kind of just spontaneously work together and create these beautiful, beautiful things. Okay, so we're kind of linking like music and poetry. Jack loved the blues form, and you've probably heard this quote as well. I want to be considered a jazz poet blowing a long blues in an afternoon jam session on Sunday. Perhaps that's why Amram's jams on Sunday. I take 242 courses, my ideas vary and sometimes roll from chorus to chorus or from halfway through a chorus to halfway into the next. That quote gives me an image of that kind of rivering, like cyclical scroll, and then also in the way that he wrote these kind of like Mobius strip style notebooks. So this is the front and the back cover of the first book, Mexico City Blues, and 210 Orizaba, Mexico is where Burroughs was living. He was hoping to come visit. And that's just the first page. So then, and on the left side, they're all numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way. And then it flips over. There's a section in there where it seems like, I don't know what he was doing, but it seems like he grabbed it and picked it up on the wrong side. And so there's a section kind of in the middle where it jumps back and forth. And I wonder, in some ways I wonder if that's like intentional for, doing his like secret naked doodlings. If we go back to scribbled secret notebooks and wild typewritten pages for your own joy. It's like if you're creating it in this way that other people can't really read or like don't fully understand how it goes together, except for you, the poet, you can kind of keep some of that intentionality and like secrecy of how you created your work to yourself. I don't know. I find it fascinating how he uses notebooks in this way. There are many beautiful notebooks at the Berg, but just wanted to show you all that. And then, okay, so here we are. So not only did he write poems, but he also called many of his poems poems, and you also have little play movies. And this is kind of where you see all of these different poets and poetic influences coming together. You've got the poem over here, and these I believe are all, these are poems of all sizes. It's from that manuscript. Be me bespangled dotted hat fool, jump upside down Pandora, leap above, make burping kings laugh for I'd, remember, I'd rather piss on scroll than parch this. This last, we'll talk about poem with an I last, because that connects to my last couple slides. Little play movie form, right? Book movie is the movie in words, the visual American form. So you see him not only talking about the American haiku not being of the Japanese tradition, but this new form. And then, I don't know if in graduate school at least, you had like the Norton anthology, you had like the modern anthology, and you had the contemporary anthology. And then a few years later, there's a Norton anthology that came out called American Hybrid. And that book is full of poems that I think Jack's poem should have been in it, but he wasn't alive when that was out, obviously. But a lot of these poems that you see in Poems of All Sizes, poems, the book movie as this hybrid form, and also little play movie form, he used all forms to kind of tell stories, to express himself. Let's see where we're at. Okay, yeah, cool, almost there. So I love this one in the middle, poem, because it says, Walking on water, nothing ever happened. Not ever happening, true story, new story, old and new. Holy baloney, holy cow, holy cats, wow. Whatever, to the feast, story, book, story, words. Anyway, it happened. Nothing happened. Everybody invited. And I love this phrase, anyway, it happened. This like, I was there, I saw it, it was true, and I'm telling you the story. Again, kind of circling back to that ancient tradition. And Brett, we were talking about the outline to pick, and that chapter 2, it was called What Happened. And I love that like intentionality of, again, just telling the truth as like ancient poet would. And poets do now as well. But and then also thinking further along this like hybrid nature, it was said that if Jack wasn't a poet or a writer, he would be a painter. And I have this book as well. A lot of his paintings were kind of paired with his haiku. And you have this one in the middle. What does this one say? Oh yeah, this is the one that's also on the front of his book of haiku that he draws his own like book design. Chief Crazy Horse looks north with tearful eyes. The first snow flurries. And here you have this kind of connection between the book of sketches and not only like like sketching in your notebook like this sketch here, but being out in the world and just writing down as quickly as you can what you see and think and feel. This so kind of the last thing that I was thinking about when I visited the archive. I could not find these. Well, I just looked at the poetry section, so they might be there, and I'll need to look further into that. But I was able to find I was kind of looking for all the poetry stuff that was published while he was alive, because I think that would be interesting to know. Other than things in journals, some of the Mexico City Blues poems were first published in this anthology magazine called Measures, put out by John Wieners, I believe, that Jim Dunn showed me the other day at the Worthing, I was like, thank you, this is phenomenal. So there are Mexico City Blues, obviously, and that was 1959. And then you have 3 broadsides that were published. And again, I love this kind of incorporation of Jack's paintings or visual imagery as well, paired with his poems. And so this one on the far right is called Someday You'll Be Lying, I believe. And that was 1968. You have this one. This is Hugo Weber. This was published in Portents in 1967, and it's a broadside diptych. There you have this image, and then his poem. And I believe Portents was Ann Charter's magazine that she put out. This is the last haiku, and this was supposed to be published before Jack passed away, but he passed away right before it was supposed to come out, so they waited, obviously. So the last haiku, and you've got his imagery here. November, how nasal the drunken, that's blurry, sorry. Conductor's call, thank you. Anyway, I love that, we talked about Jack's novels, and they're great, but there's so much other stuff like the haiku, and then like the hybrid forms that we can look at, and how he incorporates imagery and music in his poems as well. I think that's where I'll end. I had this last slide. This is fascinating to me. So we've kind of gone from like early, his early life, his early 20s to his last year, really. And there's a moment. We've all been talking about this and kind of laughing about it all week so far about Jack's apolitical nature, but what he says on Buckley about the Vietnam War, that it's like this ploy between the North and the South to get Jeeps into their country, and he said, well, do you think so? And he's like, well, yeah, they got a lot of Jeeps. And so it is kind of like, it's funny because Jack kind of just like wakes up because he's a little inebriated, to say the least, on this thing, and he's kind of interrupts Sanders a lot as well. But it's interesting because Sanders says, you know, well, yeah, you're a phenomenal poet, is what he says. You know, not a novelist, not a painter. You're a phenomenal poet. And he's talking about the Chicago riots. And Buckley is kind of pushing Ed Sanders, you know, kind of criticizing him. He's like, well, no, that's not true the way you've described it. Don't you think that's a little like sensationalist or what have you? And he interrupts Buckley. He's like, no, it happened. And here again, I think is, you know, what I love so much about, obviously Ed Sanders' poetry and Jack's as well. It happened. I wrote the stories because they were true. We're all going to die. It's important to, you know, to sing for yourself. And the last thing that I thought was absolutely beautiful, Kerouac says to Sanders, you made yourself famous by protesting. He's like, I made myself famous. He doesn't say, I made myself famous for writing novels. He doesn't say, I made myself famous by making paintings. He says, I made myself famous by writing songs and lyrics. And I think back immediately to, you know, one of his favorite poets, Walt Whitman, in Song of Myself. And I do have this quote up here as well. I believe in order, tenderness, and piety. And I think that comes up in all of his work, right? Particularly the tenderness and beauty that he sees in the world. So I guess I'll end with that. This is, if you haven't seen this, I won't play it for you, but unless you want to see it later. But this phrase to me embodies Jack Kerouac. Just as much as many other people, and Whitman as well. But you know, he was not just a novelist, and we know this, but he contains multitudes within him. And I think that's what I've got. I hope that we can kind of like make connections between all these things and have a, you know, a discussion. And I'll try to answer any questions if you have them. And there are also some more prominent scholars than me in the room that know more than I do. And they are also an amazing wealth of knowledge. And, you know, I'm so grateful for y'all being here. And so, yeah, my hope is that we can just kind of have a discussion now about what you like about Jack's poetry, what you found interesting about this and some of the presentation that I did, really just anything you want to add.
Bring up the lights.
Yeah, I got you. You got it?
You know, because you just talked about it, Buckley was nonplussed when he said the Jeep thing, because he said, well, that strategy's not working very well, is it? And he said, well, they got a lot of Jeeps.
Yeah.
But then Kerouac gets on Sanders and says, you make yourself famous by protest. Down with this, throw eggs on that. And then he says the thing about, I wrote my stuff about beauty and the ugliness.
Yeah.
And he said this line, I guess it's a Buddhist line about you can take your protest, like you spit in the wind and the wind will blow it back, something like that.
I love that.
Right, and then he like sings that song like.
Oh yes, which song at the word and the other?
Yeah.
Flurry, fluty, floating, something.
Yeah.
What was that list of essentials that you had up there? What's that from?
We got one with Dan. Yes.
So Dan,
That's not the essentials of spontaneous prose, is it?
it is.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh,
the
is
second
it?
part to it. So the Essentials of Spontaneous Prose by Jack Kerouac is like, he has this like prose stuff, and then after that is included is the list of those essentials.
Dan didn't give us that.
And that no, I know he never does, but I love that he references that as well, and that's kind of how I organize some of these slides, and certainly I love all of them, to be honest.
Is that in one of the books, that list, or?
You can find it online. You can find it. It's published. So this that Dan gives us is published, as well as the list in Charter's the Beat Anthology.
So but that's not the first page.
No, these are the first page of the essentials. No, that's this is just the list that's included after. Did you have it as well? So
Well,
yeah,
I'm looking for it. So
set up procedure.
set up,
method.
yeah.
Mhm.
So this is the second page then, right?
Yeah, this is what's included with it as well. And as a teacher, it's funny, actually, the other day, I just started making my own list of essentials for poetry. I thought that, and I recommend that all of you do that for yourselves as well. I think what a beautiful exercise to kind of make your own, in Jack's spirit, make your own list of essentials for how you choose to create and how you want to write, and how you want to be and live. And a lot of these, honestly, are like just kind of smart things to do. Although I don't think he worked on number 3 very well. It was really hard for him, never getting drunk outside of his house. But I mean, it's be in love with your life. Like, that's an essential for writing. To me, that's essential, as he says too. I love this. No time for poetry, but exactly what is. To me, that means like all time, right? Poetry is everywhere, all the time. What time is it for poetry? Not sure.
What I think is interesting is, like, when you consider number 13, remove literary, grammatical, and syntactical inhibition, right? So, be expansive, no limits, whatever. But, like Mexico City Blues is a perfect example, and Book of Blues too, where he uses the size of the notebook page, right, as a kind of inhibition, right? Because he keeps the poems only to the length of the page, right? So it's really interesting how, that kind of dichotomy there, where he's both like, be free, but in your expression, but in his own practice of writing some of his poetry, he puts these kind of artificial limits on, the form of the poem, the length of it, as a way to, I don't know, control expand on the creativity, or I don't know. And so I find that interesting as an observation, and instructive as a writer. And so I think I just want to put this out there to you as a poet. Like, what do you take from Kerouac in terms of his practice and the things that he did, things he espoused, that are maybe essential for us as, creatives in some way, especially poets?
Yeah. One, I think being in love with your life and like choosing to be happy and like trying to navigate the world in that way, I think is essential for, just being. And if you can't be, how can you write about things that you love or that are beautiful? I really love, I love, like I said, I love all of these. Telling the true story of the world in interior monologue. I love that one as well.
What about number 10?
No time for poetry, but exactly what is.
What is the?
The 3 asterisks.
Yeah.
3 stars.
I put those there for
It's a highlight of William Carlos Williams' thing of not in images but in things.
Yes, no image but in things. Yeah. So for me,
the highlighted ones more important than the others? Or?
These are ones that I highlighted these. You won't see it published this way in the anthology, but I highlighted these because these are some of the ones that I thought were directly linked to some of my other slides. I think as a poet, you often think of the image, right? Or imagist poetry, right? Poems are often these condensed, lyrical, sometimes lyrical, but also sometimes like imagistic. I think of Gertrude Stein and Tender Buttons in painting with words. If you're likening, painting Jack's paintings and writing to words, I really like, don't think of words when you stop, but to see the picture better. And I think what he means there is just try to think of that image more in your mind. Keep that jewel center of interest in the eye within the eye. The eye within the eye, to me, is the third eye, right? Where you are channeling that like divine creative spirit. You are open to having a muse or a genie or something come in and visit to help you along the way. It's interesting though too, because he says struggle to sketch. Struggle to sketch the flow that already exists intact in mind. I don't know, that word struggle, I find fascinating. I don't know if that answers your question or not.
Pithy middle eye, that's like, what's it called? I'm blanking on the shot, the meditation, the pineal gland.
Yeah. Is that the eye within the eye?
Well, it's the middle. There's a
Right.
pithy middle eye.
Pithy middle eye out, yeah.
I like number 24. That's kind of Walt Whitman, like, you know, just everything, accept everything as genuine.
Yeah, there's that, it's like a 1947 journal, and he's like, I'm not a exclusive Fitzgerald, but an inclusive Wolf, where he puts everything in it. And I think Whitman is a great example of that as well, particularly in Song of Myself. And I love that connection between, you know, well, I made myself famous by writing songs and lyrics, right? And you have that all-inclusive Song of Myself where everyone imaginable in the world is in it, right? I guess you could also kind of relate the imagistic nature of being. There's some correlations I find that between that concept and the book movie. Right? Dr. Sachs, I believe, is framed as a book movie. And, you know, I will say, I wasn't necessarily a huge fan of like the rendition of the movie On the Road, but what I did really appreciate about it was, I think what they did really well is depict Jack always scribbling in his little notebooks. That is something that I had forgotten about in the past, and seeing it again, it was really nice to kind of be like, oh yeah, this man was like constantly scribbling on any piece of paper he could find, which to me also relates to kind of that being ready and attentive to the spirit visiting you.
I was gonna say, speaking of you know, the haikus, and jotting in his notebooks all the time, you know, looking at his like diaries, notebooks, like later in his life in the 60s, he seems to turn to haiku as just a way to capture his thoughts, you know, what he's going through, what he's feeling, without having to, you know, write it all out, whether it's for lack of energy, lack of focus, or what have you. It's really interesting how, you know, he uses haiku as like a journal, you know, diary kind of form at some point in his life, you know, which I think goes to show how haiku, you know, he seemed to use haiku more than just a poetic kind of form and exercise, but it really, in some stages of his life, is a mirror to record what he otherwise could not record, or in you know, regular prose, you know.
Yeah, kind of that also that way of like stripping away the trappings of the material world and bringing spiritual enlightenment. It's like a simple way to kind of navigate all the things he was dealing with, right?
Yeah. And it's also an outgrowth of the whole Buddhist meditation thing.
Yeah.
Sure. But you know, I want to pick up on something you said about his limiting by the page. But if you listen to the book jacket where it says, I take 242 courses like a jazz man on Sunday. Well, you can only blow, so you need another breath, right? So I think that the page is like the bar.
Yeah.
You know, how many bars can you go before you have to, you know?
Unless you're circle breathing.
So well said, yeah.
Yeah, well, I don't know how to do that.
Yeah.
I mean, John Coltrane did, I don't know.
Right.
Sure.
I think the blues as a genre too is, you know, inherently limited. You know, the 12-bar blues, or the 2 bars, and the A, B, you know, C sections repeating, right? So again, I just find it really interesting that he you know, extols the virtues of inhibition, and he's all about it, but it comes out in a form that is inherent, in forms that are inherently limited. You know, it's almost as if by virtue of limitations, thus can come more freedom. But he doesn't really say the limitations part out loud.
Right.
Yeah, well, I
And like
think
the 3 lines in the haiku, these are just like, you know, just really short 3-line American experiences.
It's kind of like the haiku, the poetry was like a break, like you said, but also like sharpening. It was like used as like a knife sharpener for, you know, and then when I go to because some of the Dharma is nothing, you know, it's like mass of words, so it's like that must have been exhausting, and so I think it's like a sort of a respite to like just try to put it in a few words. I also like a discipline to like not go off the deep end every time I sit down to write.
Yeah. There's like this really simple quote in one of my art textbooks in undergrad, and it said, poetry is telling a rich story using minimal means. And I love that. It's like that distillation and like condensing of, the great everything into, like the diamond.
Yeah, the jewel center of interest.
Well, poetry gets away from the narrative, doesn't it? I mean, he doesn't have the stress of having to write a story. It's just a snapshot of the imagination.
I was somewhere he's like, but there's something about like stripping the narrative away and just having like the image and the song and the lyric.
Yeah.
I'll have to find that quote. Yeah. Are there any poets in the room? Do we all write poetry? Some of us?
Yeah.
I don't know, I just find like, I find the way that he chooses to write and express himself through writing and the lists of, the rules that he kind of sets up for us are a really beautiful way to kind of get into writing if you don't yet write or write poetry. But I kind of return to these all the time. At one point I had them like pasted in front of my typewriter.
Oh, I did too. Ginsberg asked him to do that. He said, when he was writing Ginsberg snatches of Visions of Neil, Ginsberg was like, I think it talked to Holmes about like, he's gone off the deep end. This is like completely unpublishable, masturbatory. And so I think out of that he said, tell me, write it down, the rules, and
Yeah. Oh, I just found, I forgot to mention these two things. Drama ain't nowhere without poetry. See Broadway. Poetry ain't nowhere without drama. That's why I write what you call prose, in all caps, novels, see? My motto is Shakespeare, in the interest of which I advise you really to plan now a big, Milton-esque dramatic poem for your next book. Boog, I mean. Imagine you getting hung up on big modern Shakespearean city tragedies using long line, short line prosody, ellipses, etc. See? I decided this when looking over my poetry, and my novels is in quotation marks, which have better line in them. There's that kind of other connection between lines. And then, does anyone know, oh yeah, I want to ask this question. Does anybody know which poet Jack thought was the best American poet?
Charlie Parker.
Poe?
Who, Poe? You said Poe?
I have a feeling it wouldn't be that easy.
Frank Sinatra.
Any other guesses? All right, I want to share this with you. Burroughs, in fact, speaks himself like Shakespeare. Listen to Burroughs talk. Don't be fooled by mighty Burroughs. Gregory, you are about to come in contact with the greatest writer alive in the world today, William Seward Burroughs, who always says that Shakespeare is the end. Apollinaire is a veritable cow's turd in a meadow in the continent of Shakespeare. The greatest French poet is Rabelais. The greatest Russian poet is Dostoevsky. The greatest Italian poet is Corso. The greatest German poet is probably Spangler, for all I goddamn know. The greatest Spanish poet is, of course, Cervantes. The greatest American poet is Kerouac.
You're a genius all the time.
The greatest Israeli poet is Ginsberg. The greatest Eskimo poet is Lord Bleaky Igloogloo. The greatest Burroughsian poet is World. Well, boys, I'll be seeing you in March in Paris, and don't flog your dummies and save some girls for me and some Harry, and he just goes on and on. But I love that quote that he's like, and the greatest American poet is himself. So
That and number 29 there make me think of that Salvador Dali quote, "You must act like the genius you want to be," which, you know, is really just him saying you got to be confident enough to believe that you can do it. You got to keep your eyes up and keep going up.
yeah.
Neil Gaiman said, you know, you have to have, it's tricky being a writer, you have to have that kind of schoolboy confidence to like keep going and push through. Like, yeah, I am great at this. Like,
Bukowski says the same thing. He's like, when people ask me who I think the best poet is, I say myself, you know? He says me, right? And I guess Song of Myself too could be wrapped in there. But Bukowski says as well, conquest begins in a mood of confidence, right? So that like conquering of the, you know, the story or the image or what's given or, you know, whatever you're working on begins in that mood of confidence, which Kerouac had. Maybe to a fault, I don't know. Got him in trouble sometimes. Do you have anything else you guys want to add? I mean, we got a few minutes. I'm kind of
just a goofy question here, man. Did he ever like choose his notebooks based on what he wanted to write? Like, did he choose like intentionally a 3x5 just because you wanted to keep it ultra short and think, well, it's a limerick, maybe I should go to 4x6?
I don't have the direct answer for that, but Brett might be able to
it's the
mention more.
pocket.
So it's just all based on pocket size.
Yeah,
And
like,
it's just those
but there
always-
are some that are bigger than like the one that I have.
Yeah, that's what I carry as the 4.
Yeah, that one. Yeah, and they were mostly
spiral.
always spiral that flipped like this, kind of like a scroll, or you know,
Yeah,
that's
that was the other thing. Is I used to use a top spiral because I'm left-handed, and it's like you either get wrist cramps from the spiral, use it upside down, or use it backwards. I don't think Kerouac was left-handed.
This is a great question because it is true. He would use different notebooks for different situations until I think he really latched on to the small like pocket
Just
size.
what fit right there, not
Yeah.
what fit in this pocket or that pocket.
Yeah, so he would have like some bigger notebooks like this is, he'd have bigger than this, right? And so when he'd have like a bigger notebook, he would kind of do the same thing that Logan was talking about where, you know, he would write down one side, flip it over, write down the other. He would often, like in the early on the road notebooks, he would like write down one side like this, you know? And when he was done, he would go back to the beginning and write down the other side. So it becomes really hard if you're researching to know what side to look at. It can be really confusing. But then he seemed to really like, you know, we were talking about like the kind of limitations that he would, you know, give himself. Even with larger notebooks, he would then start to draw a line down the middle and write on the columns, almost as if to give himself the size of the small notebook. And so, yeah, he really did seem to experiment based on, you know, his needs and what he was writing until basically he just seemed to fall in love with pocket-sized notebooks in the kind of mid-50s.
Along the lines of the column, do you ever use a steno book?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
For that, with that in mind?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, he would use those. And, you know, sometimes he seemed to just pick a notebook out of convenience. There's like a set of notebooks in the archive that have like other students' names on them. They're like school notebooks, maybe like grade school notebooks or something. And so I don't know where he got them, but he seemed to just take a pile of them and use those for a couple months and a couple projects, right? So convenience also played into it.
This tone poem is in a notebook that's about this size in length and width. And I think it has like a green cover.
Is there any like matchbook poems? Because back in the day we used to, you know, write, phone numbers of girls.
I didn't see
Matchbook. Matchbooks and cocktail napkins.
Yeah. But I one of the things that I was wondering was, even in the Steve Allen interview, when he said, well, where do you get that scroll paper? A fine stationery store. And I'm like, really? But what I was thinking was, because back in the day, the AP rolls, or the ticker tapes, you know, used to come out of the newspapers, that he probably got his first scroll at the Sun. And that's kind of what I was thinking, you know, maybe he was got some of those from the newspaper company.
Yeah, there's some at Emory University in Atlanta where there's a big Kerouac collection. There is a couple of giant unused rolls of teletype paper, and it's kind of interesting to imagine, you know, what those could have become, right? But clearly he had a stash that he kept, and that were around, you know, at the time of his death. So you can go to Emory University, I've done this, and request those and just kind of examine them.
Nice.
It's,
They're blank.
yeah, they're blank. Yeah.
What is it like is it open on the ends, or does it have like a little thing like a fax paper to hook up to something?
No, it's just a roll of paper, tapes.
You know, I've gone to many very good stationery stores looking for this.
Yeah.
I guess when it went to like they don't use it anymore. Like fax paper is too waxy.
Right.
And I used chiropractic rollers. They're like 11 inches long, but they are so thin.
Yeah.
That trying to roll them back up or read from them just destroys it.
Yeah, well, maybe something more along the lines of like the old Doc Matrix stocks.
Oh yeah.
I mean, obviously after Jack's
Yeah, I
time,
have some,
but for your own practical
paper from
purposes,
way
yeah.
back, but like, well, where do you can't buy that with the sprockets on
I
the
think
side?
you can find it.
I have some.
It's findable.
Because I used it to make a long poem. I was in a workshop at Lynn Shu, the long poem, kind of thinking about this epic, and I had some dot matrix paper, and it was like perforated and like zigzagged, right? So I made this book. It was 42 feet long, and I like typed it like on my typewriter through my front window, and it like ended it into a trash bin. And I was like, I didn't want to mess up, so like I had to like type each one, but it folded up into like a quarter-size page. It's pretty fun.
Well, where it tears off though, you had to be careful that it didn't tear off when you were going to the next page, right?
Yeah. The thing that I found that is really affordable, you can get it at Lowe's, is masking paper for like painting.
Okay.
You can get them in different sizes, I have a typewriter that has a larger carriage that can fit like a 12-inch scroll, but they sell at any hardware store really like the masking paper in like 8-inch. Which it's kind of nice too.
So you
And it's a little thicker.
paper like you put down when you're
Like if you're like putting like trimming on the wall, like something like that.
No, yeah, you told me that last year. Okay. But it's been a nightmare getting them off of the rolls I have. I'm not into like writing, except as maybe a one-timer, like a long thing, because trying to like get it on the computer is just a nightmare.
Yeah.
I wonder how we do with the computer. You don't have to stop, right? Nowadays, just keep on going and going and going. There's no limits to that.
I was thinking the other day, like, what would Jack think about like a word processor? Because it does function like a scroll, or it just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Yeah.
I wonder if he would have enjoyed that, or if he still would have preferred, like, as an athlete, right? I wonder if he would have preferred that more like an aesthetic nature of hand typing.
Well, he liked having an electric typewriter, but I don't think he would have liked the screen thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Because there's a visceral, there's a
Right.
you get a thing out of the ink and
Somatic nature.
and your fingers are actually touching something. Yeah.
Right. And a word processor, it's so easy to hit delete, right? And when you type on a typewriter, it's almost as if you like have the wrong word, or you want to change the word, you're just like, well, screw it, it's too much to go back and
Sterling was
press
like,
it out.
I want it unedited, right?
Yeah,
Don't
yeah.
change anything, right? Even mistakes, leave it all in.
Yeah. So it's easier to not delete when you're doing a typewriter.
Yeah, I guess he wouldn't have liked it.
Yeah.
Remember the days when you had the whiteout and the carbon paper? Oh, what a mess. I mean, I never got out of that without having ink all over.
Yeah.
Can you remind us again of the order piety quote again? Because I have a very similar quote. You didn't know who Lucy Lorcan was, the mill girl from Wall, who wrote New England Girlhood? And she writes, from the beginning, Lowell had a high reputation for good order, morality, piety, and all that was dear to old-fashioned Windsor's heart. It sounds very similar.
That's so interesting.
To the Kerouac quote.
Wow. Is that from a poem?
This is from her book, New England Girlhood, her autobiography.
Who's
Which
that
is
by?
well worth reading.
Yeah.
What year was she writing? What years was she writing about?
So she was involved in like 1840. Yeah. It's a park named after her. Lucy Lowell Park.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
Before he says this, Buckley opens up like his section by saying, "How do you, Mr. Kerouac? How do you view this? That people view your writing as misanthropic and like rebellion for rebellion's sake and all this stuff?" And he said, "Well, Ferlinghetti jump on his back, and the communists jump on his back, and he even makes a dig at Ginsburg in the audience.
Yeah, I think Ginsburg's.
But he says, and they called it in the papers, beat mutiny, beat insurrection, and he says, words I never used, being a Catholic.
Right.
So that kind of relates to what he just said about, that's when he says order, tenderness, and
Right. The piety, like the reverence to like the divine spirit.
Right, right.
So.
But I always was curious, like, I guess a mutiny or an insurrection is anti-Catholic, or like it would violate your Catholic faith, or just the divine spirit, you know?
In the moment.
Right.
Yeah.
Does anybody know when is the Jack Kerouac Museum opening
Oh, here?
in Lowell?
The church.
Like the church?
So-
No idea.
Yeah, there's, so there's, everybody's heard that Zach Bryan, the country musician, purchased the Jean Baptiste church, but there's it's been purchased, and then there's renovations, to be done, and it's a lot of legwork, so it's several years away.
I read that it was, first step was bringing up the code.
Yeah.
So I was thinking it's probably insured, and that's why it's chained off, I imagine.
Yeah, we're waiting on more updates, but that's the current status. So, and that's not part of the Lowell Celebrates Kerouac Festival, but we're certainly looking forward to, having that come to fruition, so we can have events there as well.
That'd be great. Imagine the poems echoing in that space.